It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. All right. We are live now. Welcome everybody to a I mean it's been a long time. I say that every time, but it's always been a long time. But
Yeah.
it's good to be back. And
Yeah.
we're talking about comics, which is that's really what it all is about. So I've got my two guests returning here to do another retrospective. We have Eric Brain over here.
How's it going?
Hello. And then we have Joe Corallo down here. There we go. And today we're talking Fantastic Four, number one. This is my first time reading it. I know that makes me, I don't know, a noob, a poser. I don't know. But there's so many comics to read. But this is really, I definitely consider myself more of a Marvel fan than
hmm
DC, though I like a lot of DC. But definitely more of a Marvel guy, and it's kind of a crime that it's taken me this long to read this book. I would
Yeah.
say so. So we will say hi to the chat as they come in. Paul Riley is here. He says, "Hey, good to see you." But first, we were talking about this a little bit, and then I said, let's go live." So this, Joe, you recommended this version of the book,
Yes. Yes.
and that is an awfully thick book for for one single issue. But I don't know, you want to explain what exactly this is.
Yeah. It's so
There we go.
good. It's good. I think that's it's breaking it down. It's called Fantastic Four number one panel by panel for a reason. Like it
Yeah.
really
So it's literally they've taken and you explained this to me, but when I saw it in person, it made more sense to me. But they've
yeah.
taken a nice issue of Fantastic Four number one, not a perfect issue, but a nice issue, and they scanned it in these high res scans, and they did it um, panel by panel, essentially, just like the name says. So you
Yeah.
have chunks of the book that you can read, and it reads a little bit like this. There you go. So
Yeah.
it almost just looks like a storybook to read, like less
Oh
like a
yeah.
comic book. But
Yeah.
just the form factor itself, there's a lot of charm in reading it this way. So I'm glad, and I'm looking forward to when they do a. Is it Spider-Man number one or Amazing Fantasy 15?
It's both in one book. They're only doing the Spider-Man story for Amazing Fantasy 15. I think some people out there might not realize there's more than just that Spider-Man story in Amazing Fantasy 15. But and then it's the full Amazing Spider-Man number one, which I believe it's the first two issues have two stories in it. Because you have Amazing Spider-Man number one, you have the chameleon story, but you also have like he's trying to join the Fantastic Four. You
Mm-hmm.
have that bit, and then in issue two, you have the Vulture story, and then there's like a weird like alien invasion like story.
The terrible Tinker, I think it is, and we find out.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, you think he's an alien, but you find out we may not see him again till like issue 160 or something like that.
It's a long
Then we
time. Yeah,
find out that he's not.
the
yeah.
chameleon's really early on too, right? Isn't he in?
Number one.
Oh,
Yep,
he is in number one. Okay.
he's number one, and Craven's cousin. So
But I don't think
Oh,
we didn't know that in
we
issue
didn't know
one
that
of it.
yet. We don't know that until
it's
we
gotta
meet Craven.
it's gotta unfold. But that honestly, so what like big sort of perspective thing here that I'm noticing is the origin how the origin stories were handled in these Marvel characters. It seems like a very specific way. So it had, yes, there was the origin, but it wasn't like the whole story is the origin. It's there's also an adventure of them, being a superhero. And
Do
I
you
think
mind?
that there's something in that's the formula I think that made these number ones so interesting.
Yeah,
Do you mind if I take this one, Joe?
yeah, go for it.
The thing with Fantastic Four number one was we've all heard the story that Stan was going to leave the industry, and his wife said, "Well, just do one story the way you want to do it,"
Yeah.
which he did. But the formula that he followed was basically there were years of 6-page horror, sci-fi, mystery stories, and Fantastic Four kind of follows that same script, only times 4, because there's a lot of the elements. Because when you read this, I know that it was written with the possibility of more issues to come, but it also read like so many other stories in that era. Because if you read that, I mean, just how uber serious, like when Reed fires up the flare and says, "This is the first time. I pray it will be the last." The Thing is this, just, I mean, the Thing's vocabulary was never as loquacious as it was in this issue because he was just written completely different. He was a nasty man before the accident, or before the flight. He was nastier after. He is originally going to be Reed's antagonist, and somewhere along the line they said, well, if we soften him up, this might last a while, type of thing.
Yeah, he's too cool of a character to make the
Yeah,
villain,
and
right?
so, but it had a lot of the trappings of your typical Atlas, monster story. So that, but you could see even there that there were glimpses of what would become Marvel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I see similarities. Again, we were just talking about Spider-Man. I see similarities with how a new character is shown. Not just that though. I think I have at least a bit of appreciation for how different this was for the time, because I've read several Silver Streak issues and Black Terror, and like just reading Golden Age books, and you kind of see what the norm was in comics, and then to read this, I can appreciate at least a little bit how it strayed from what was the norm. Even though there's still a lot of similarities, I think it's of its time. But yeah, it is interesting though what was innovative about the storytelling.
Well, you can also read, if you go back and read the DC comics or the national comics at the time, whether it was Justice League or one of the individual characters like Flash, Green Arrow, Superman, Batman, everybody got along wonderfully. And right out of the gate, you knew Marvel was going to be different.
Yeah. With the art though, one interesting thing is, I think I've said this before on stream, certainly with Breen, but Mike Stokowski is one of the most underrated artists of that time, and he was selling some of the most comics with Justice League of America, and it's been brought up that page 6 of Fantastic Four, so this one here, that's more of a Mike Stokowski layout with the 2 large panels at the bottom and the more vertical, because that's not the kind of stuff you would typically see Jack Kirby doing. And it's been suggested that panels like that and like those kind of layouts, because when you go through this issue in particular, there's a lot, there are plenty of typical Kirby layouts, but there's a lot of also variations, which kind of leans into the idea of Stan and Martin Goodman kind of overthinking things and giving notes and being like, "Oh, Jack, you got to do some." You got to do a page that's more like Stokowski. They're selling so many of those Justice League of Americas and like those kind of things going on. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't think that today or decades ago even, but this idea of there being this nervousness and Stan and Jack trying to figure it out and being like, oh, we gotta swipe more of what they're doing over at DC because they're selling all these comics. It's funny to think about it that way.
Yeah. So I want to get into the story itself, but I've got a conspiracy theory too. When it comes to the origins, Stan Lee's story about how the Fantastic Four was created, And I've heard the story in so many documentaries, exactly how you told it, Eric. And I look at that and I think, was that completely true, or did he sort of make it a little larger than life, like he always seems to do with everything? You know, like because I always heard it was his last. This was going to be his last hurrah. You know, and he was done making comics. And then I kind of wonder, that makes a nice story though behind the story, and he was so good at that that I wonder, you know, if he kind of leaned into that. Maybe he was sick of comics. That's possible too, not making money or whatever. But that's a bit of my conspiracy theory. I'm curious if he would have carried on.
It's possible. I mean, a lot of people go through life threatening to quit their job on a daily basis and never do.
Yes.
Now, the part of the story that's kind of had holes poked in it was the famous golf outing.
Yeah.
I don't know this one.
That's only that Martin Goodman was golfing with oh God, which one was it, Joe?
Was it Mort at the time? Was it Mort Whiteside?
Even Weisinger or Infantino or who knows, one of the higher ups.
Yeah.
And the stories, we got that series that's going gangbusters. And Martin Goodman, who never met a trend he didn't jump on. If you think that Marvel running ideas into the ground was a 90s thing, no. It has its roots decades before that with Martin Goodman and all of his pursuits. And that part has kind of been debunked, but it's a neat story. So it's kind of like, we know wrestling is fake, but we watch it anyway, kind of thing. He's got to go with it at this point.
Yeah.
One part of it, though, I'll elaborate on a little bit, is a lot of people do kind of ignore the fact that Jack Kirby, swiped and lifted a lot from his own work for this, insofar as he had done the Challengers of the Unknown at DC, in the years prior to this. And it's a similar-ish concept. It's not the superheroes, but it's still the sci-fi and fighting monsters and all sorts of crazy things. And it's a team of 4, and they all have a similar kind of costume and things like that. And people, I feel, definitely downplay that, even though it seems pretty obvious that Kirby was lifting a bit of his own work from DC over to Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
A question I want to ask you, Joe. We all know that the Fantastic Four didn't get their costumes until the 3rd issue.
Yeah.
Which you would be unfathomable today. I'm wondering if Marvel wasn't hedging their bets, thinking, maybe if the superhero part of it doesn't work out, we've still got, it's because it did kind of fit the formula they'd been doing for years.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's why they didn't, because they'd clearly been established when the story begins. They've already got their powers. They're called together, for a menace. And just as fair warning, when we get to talking about that particular menace, I'm going to embarrass the hell out of myself and both of you, but just be warned.
Okay.
But they didn't show up. They didn't go put on their costumes because they didn't have them. I wonder if that was by design, or if they just hadn't thought of it yet, or there has to be a reason. I don't know if anybody's ever talked about that.
Yeah, I do think part of what they were leaning into, like issue 1 in particular, is very interesting. Like, I think part of it was leaning into that. We're trying to do something different. Everyone else wears costumes. What if we have these, characters that aren't wearing costumes, things like that. But since you're bringing up the costumes, I think something really interesting in this issue is you can kind of tell it had to be chopped up a little bit, because the continuity of the Thing wearing the trench coat and hat, there are at least 1 or 2 panels where he clearly took it off, and now he's wearing it again, and then it's off again after. So it seems very plausible that this was supposed to be like at most other things before this of, oh, we're going to, do these as like, anywhere from like 11 to 13 page stories in one of the, amazing adventure type books, and kind of get a feel for how they would work on the story from there, and see how it would go. And instead they, went and did it as one. They took, two stories and printed as one book. But also to the point of not being sure what to do and not firming things up until issue 3. The keen reader will notice that no one talks about it being New York. It is referred to as Central City.
I kept looking for the Flash.
Right? Because
Interesting.
because the big competition, DC, all of their heroes are in non-real cities. Right. So they're like, it seemed like they were testing the waters, seeing if it was going to be popular, or seeing if they would get, good response. And then once they started getting more comfortable, did things like, oh, we're gonna, we'll do the costumes. They're in New York and things like that.
Well, there's the other thing too is that there's, I think, sometimes an assumption that Stanley or Jack Kirby or both were masterminds and had, how much of the Marvel universe did they have figured out, or even the Fantastic Four, how much did they have figured out ahead of time? I think like most, I suspect like most comics, they were flying from issue to issue to like get things rolling, at least initially. But that's interesting because this issue is also a good example of being so flexible that they could have gone in any number of directions. Again, like did it have to be New York? No, I mean that's the way it ended up being, but it didn't have to be. It didn't. There's so many things that could have gone very different directions based on any number of things. So really, I think interesting. Here's a comment. Also, I want to check in on Paul. Paul Riley says an interesting bonus page in the back on the Fantastic Four Epic Collection #1. Joe, do you have that book? I bet you do.
No, because I have the omnibuses. I don't have the
okay.
epics of that. I have plenty of other Fantastic Four Epic collections. But
yeah.
I don't have those. But yeah, I mean there's some bonus features like that in some of the omnibuses as well. Yeah. But the Epic collections are a really great way to read them. A lot of times when you're dealing with the omnibuses, like the Silver Age and some of the other ones like that are basically just reprinting the Masterworks blown up. Those tend to have everything kind of in order, but you'll get a lot of omnibuses that are like, Fantastic Four by, John Byrne or, Mark Miller, or, Jonathan Hickman, things like that. Mm-hmm. And you might not get all of the other appearances of the Fantastic Four around there, but the Epic collections do a very good job at also pulling in all the other appearances that are relevant. Like there's a few times where if you're a particular fan and you can kind of be like, I get why they didn't put this issue in here, but I would have put this issue in here and stuff like that. But for the most part, any appearances in, Marvel Comics Presents or 2-in-1 or Marvel Fanfare and things like that, they also splice into those. So the Epic collections are a really great way to pick them up in a fat trade that, you can hold open pretty easily and not have to like lay out on a desk or a table or something like that, and read them comfortably. Like you could comfortably read, an Epic collection like on the couch or in bed or something like that. But I highly recommend reading, reading them that way if you can.
And in this case, he says a sketch page by Stanley with various designs for the Fantastic Four uniform 4 logo, which doesn't really surprise me, especially early on like that he would be more hands-on with logo design or any of that, just to get his ideas out there.
Yeah.
He says, I hadn't known it was Stan who came up with that, assumed it was Jack.
I just want to know who came up with the 4 boob window for Sue. I mean, that person just doesn't get enough credit.
Probably
I
Greg
feel
Land.
like
I don't know.
It's gotta be Tom DeFalco, right? Like that had to have come from higher up.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he was writing at the time, but
yeah,
it
it's that or Paul Neary, right? It would have been Paul Neary around then.
or is it or Paul Ryan?
Paul Ryan. No, I'm thinking. I always get Cap.
Paul Neary. I like both of them.
Yeah, no, I like them a lot too. But yeah, it was Paul Ryan, yeah.
Well, remember, it's just boy, they do take some did take some heat, and to this day.
Oh, yeah,
I was gonna say it's still floating around a lot.
I mean, it's saved Mike Grell from always hearing about Cosmic Boy's like girdle, like that design.
Yeah.
But
well, okay, so I want to bad segue, but I want to transition a little bit into the story. I want to talk. Here's my list. Okay, here's my agenda. Sure. I want to talk about Jack Kirby's art, especially because there is a progression for him. At the same time, it's Jack Kirby, So I want to talk about Jack Kirby's art. I think that's a big one. The story here and sort of the Marvel characters. Marvel's often credited with making more real characters likable with flaws and all that kind of stuff. And this is where it starts, clearly evident there. And I want to talk about the plot as well. If there are other things, let me know. But those are the 3 big things I think that stood out to me, and I feel like we got to talk about. So, why don't we talk about the plot first, if that's okay? So I heard, was it Eric? You said it could have been 2 stories that they pushed into one. Yeah. I absolutely see that as a very solid possibility, maybe even probability with this for sure. But there was actually a lot of shifting. It just felt like a lot of shifting, like it could be different stories, but it wrapped up so nicely. I think the flashback was important as well, but he started out with them being heroes. And I always think that this is a curious, like interesting thing, starting out as heroes. So, hey, they're going to get hit by these space waves and everything will be just fine because they're going to be superheroes. That right off the bat, and then you get their origin story. I don't know, thoughts on why? Why would you do that? As opposed to chronological?
Well, I think, again, it's a storytelling method, and Joe can speak to this better than me, and he probably will after I'm finished. You introduce the characters, which I thought was a kind of a clever way of doing it, and obviously they did it for dramatic effect. Sue, she gets the call, so instead of just leaving and taking a cab back, she turns invisible to show everybody who she is. Johnny, well, the thing does about $1 million worth of property damage when he could have just as easily also taken a cab back to, I don't know if they named what would become the Baxter Building. Johnny could have just gotten out of the car and flown away instead of melting the car from flaming on while he's still in it. But so they do that because it's dramatic. Now, you get them all there. You don't know why they've been assembled yet, but we don't know who these people are yet. So cue the origin. And I said, I'm sure that's been done, several times over the years in fiction, but within 12 pages, we get an introduction to the character. We find out they like racking up property damage, but we find out how they came together.
Yeah.
That's a lot for 12 pages.
Yeah. And there's some personality. This is when I take it back to just, reading the Silver Streak stories to prepare for, I've written a Silver Streak twice now, which is kind of funny. But looking at some of the Golden Age stuff with Silver Streak, he is so flat. He's just there could be a really cool origin story there or something deeper, but there's just not. Like it's just so
Yeah.
flat. And then when I read this, there's not necessarily a ton, but Stan Lee does a really good job of getting some personality in each of those characters, including the Mole Man, which is impressive, I think, especially for the time.
Yeah, no, I think Stan, definitely had an understanding of the medium that, plenty of other people didn't at the time. But, Breen and I could probably recommend some like really solid Golden Age comics to read because it does require knowledge going in because it's very easy to try to read Golden Age comics and pick up the wrong stuff and just be like, how does anyone read this? But I'm a big fan of like Matt Baker, a lot of his artwork, especially like Phantom Lady and things like that. There are some great strips as well, like the Little Nemo strips. I'm a big Winsor McKay fan and stuff like that. But yes, it is very easy to you get a lot of repetitive stories. You get a lot of things like that.
Yeah, and I would recommend you wouldn't get a great deal of superheroes stories out of this, but the Roy Thomas PS art books, where he's basically taken public domain stuff and put them together in hardcover. Now they're not remastered, so some of the pages can be a little tough to read, especially when your eyes are as old as these. But there's just a treasure trove of great, Golden Age pre-code horror, science fiction, etc. Jungle, just about every genre other than superhero. But then again, after the war, there really weren't a whole lot of superheroes. I mean, DC had, the Trinity was still around, Green Arrow, and later Aquaman, but there really wasn't that much other than that. Most of them took the next decade or so off.
Yeah. Well, interesting. And we'll kind of get into, because that was a little bit of the plot, but that character driven, getting close to the characters, have them being flawed, even though they're superheroes, that was abundant for me in this one issue. And I was actually kind of surprised, like maybe even more so than other Marvel books. I've got to think about that a little bit, but it was very abundant throughout.
I don't think it's a hot take to say that Stan and Jack on Fantastic Four might have been the highlight of Marvel in the 60s. That, and I mean, in terms of Stan's writing, I feel like Fantastic Four and Spider-Man are like the two books of that decade that really, I think, in terms of just the originality and creating all of these characters and having really building out like a rogues gallery, building out supporting casts. Like there's a lot of other stuff that's also very good. I just feel those two in particular are probably
well, and it was Steve Ditko on Spider-Man, so
yeah,
that statement of Stan and Jack Kirby could be. I don't know, Breen, what do you think? I saw your the wheels
no, I was getting no, they say when people ask greatest runs of all time, I always disqualify Stan and Jack because it's not fair to everybody else. And even though I said Jack wasn't part of Spider-Man, those two, Joe's right. They're the first 100 issues of Fantastic Four and Spider-Man are untouchable. There's it doesn't get any better than that. You can come at me with Miller's Daredevil. Well, there is no Miller Daredevil without these. Anyway, but if any other collaboration of Stan and Jack's belong at least on the fringes of this, Thor.
Yeah.
Because that's just so grandiose in scope that if you read that all the way through, I mean, first 20, 25 issues of Journey into Mystery, it looks a lot like this Fantastic Four we just read. But once they get going, holy smokes, did they come up with some stuff?
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads me into the character design, because I think that was another thing perhaps that made this book stand out so much. And not just this book, but going forward, the character design is fantastic, and it's a kind of amazing how much has stood the test of time. Like the thing, I would think that he would change a bit more than he did, but it's basically the same, the same character design. We didn't see costumes, we didn't see, some details, but generally speaking, like the character designs have stood through. And the Mole Man, this first image here,
Oh yeah,
like the extremely flat head. I love.
yeah,
I just loved this so much.
yeah. Which I also have to assume is what the basis for the Simpsons elderly man Hans Moleman, who also has a flat head and looks very old and disgusting.
It only makes sense, yeah. And I'll hear criticism. It seems like I'll hear either one end of the spectrum or the other, and that is that Jack Kirby's the greatest artist of all time, or he's very overrated and his stuff's ugly. And I think it's shifted more to he's the greatest artist of all time as more time passes. Have you guys heard that though? Especially like I've heard like older, like I didn't appreciate Jack Kirby until I got older. I thought his stuff was ugly until I got older.
I'm that guy. When I started in '75, he had just come back to Marvel, and I'm like, who in the is this? Because I was a Gil Kane guy, and basically the two of them did all the covers.
Yeah,
and and admittedly, Jack did not. His best days were behind him by the time he got back in '75. But
yeah,
you have to go way, way back in Jack's career to find, well drawn people. Because the farther along he went, whether it was that his workload was just so big that I know what he's going to get. But what doesn't change, he may not be the best artist of all time, but you're not going to find a better storyteller. And that's something that also you have to be in this hobby for a while to kind of get the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are people that can write well, and there are people that can tell stories, and then there's the ability to move them along. Because if there's any knock on Alex Ross, is that he's not the best storyteller because his sequential art style isn't as good as his individual pieces. But Jack could just move a story along better than anybody I think that's ever been in this business.
This is a page right at the beginning, and I mean these are a couple panels, I guess, but just the first one that crosses the 2 pages here, there's so much storytelling in there. I also think I've heard criticisms, his women were ugly, but I would disagree with that very much in this issue. Everyone, the women looked cute, the characters were more anatomically standard. I don't know how else to say that, but I still see little flashes of his very I don't know, cubic basic shapes. I don't know how to describe it, that you can kind of see like that's Jack Kirby, and how that develops over time, but you can kind of see where it's beginning to come from, maybe in here with some of the faces especially.
Yeah, no, I think he's drawn plenty of women, and that don't look that same way. This is some of
that looks like Vince Coletta inking too.
Yeah,
because Vince Coletta was a renowned romance artist in his own right.
Yeah,
and I think he just started instinctively erasing his own stuff.
Yeah, but I don't know. And then you get into like the golden age like Captain America stuff, and again, like you can kind of tell it's still Jack, but it's so different from what you see in something like Fantastic Four.
Yeah, there's a progression. I mean, as there is with any artist, but
Oh,
it's yeah, it was just kind of cool to see where it came from. Yeah, here's another great panel right here. I should have got the bigger panel up. Let's see. Mr. Fantastic arms just reaching up to grab that missile.
I love that bit. I think it's
yeah,
really good one.
Okay, I have a question for the two of you. Do you think if they had to do over again, they would have come up with a different name for Reed Richards, for his superhero name?
I think they might have to at least change that conversation. Have either of you ever heard the Norm Macdonald bit on that?
No.
There's go find it. It's on YouTube, but like it's a comedy bit. I'm forgetting some of the other comedians, but Norm is Mr. Fantastic in it, and they're just reading that exact bit. So they reenact the whole thing in like audio form, and then Norm's like, "And I'm Mr. Fantastic," and everyone's like, "Whoa, wait a minute, why do you get to be Mr. Fantastic?" And they're just like going like they have like the whole argument play out.
Yeah,
it's really funny.
Right. Now, if you take that to its logical conclusion, I can see why maybe Sue would end up calling him that, and there's no way she's ever leaving him for Namor. If you just think about that for a second.
Yes.
But this was 1961, and I don't think that was the intent, unless Stan was having a little private joke with him. Yeah.
No, but it was funny though, because it was, and Sue, you called me the Thing. I'm gonna go with that. The Thing, and then okay, I'll be Mr. Fantastic. Yeah, so funny. I have to wonder. Obviously, now you wouldn't change it because I wouldn't want to change it because the formula, whatever happened, it worked. So
you don't hear it though. He's never referenced as Mr. Fantastic anymore, and probably hasn't been for decades. He's just Reed Richards now.
Yeah, it's hard to say it with a straight face.
Yeah,
that's and they call him like Reed a lot, and it's like he's a doctor. Everyone's a little too chummy with these Marvel characters.
Yeah, there's no respect. But Doctor Doom, he's a doctor, so too funny.
Well, now, if he were smarter than 3 or 4 teenage girls in the Marvel universe, maybe they would give him the respect again.
Well, there's that.
But he's been lapped by the field now. So he's Reed.
Yeah. I'm gonna just share my screen here real quick and take a look at. Let's see. I just went to trusty Google Images here just to show the cover in its entirety, because that's a little hard to see with these panel by panel versions. But the cover here, this is definitely one of the most, it's one of the most iconic comic book covers ever, just because of the legacy and everything. But looking at it just from a purely aesthetic perspective as well, I gotta say the font is pretty great. And I haven't really paid that much attention to it. Like, do they still use this font, or are they using a completely different logo?
They'll bring it back on occasion. They did bring it back for a while in the book. I think when Simonson was doing it, I know when Ghost Rider, Spider-Man, the Gray Hulk, and I forgot who the fourth one was now. I think they brought the logo back for those issues. I don't know if they kept it much longer, and they've gone back to a couple of the logos over time, but that one's still my favorite.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It still looks just, I don't know, fresh to me. Like it looks, I don't know. There's something about it looks really. It just looks nice. It's really clean.
Yeah, and for people who might not be aware, that logo is designed and was pasted up by Sal Brodsky.
Mm,
So just so people.
Nice.
Mhm.
come with the facts.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah, I like it. A fun cover. Lots of monster designs in here as well, which I think is synonymous with Jack Kirby artwork. Like it was just cool to see monsters everywhere. I think as a kid too, because I have to also remind myself, like initially these were the target audience really was kids. And then at some point those kids got older and comics got older. But I could definitely see that being cool because all of these heroes had something that a kid would want, even being an ugly rock monster. You know, there's something about that would be appealing to kids going invisible. So I don't know. It was pretty interesting how he nailed that on the head. They nailed that on the head.
yeah.
This cover does bring up another question that I'm going to ask Joe. How did Reed get tangled up in those ropes in the first place? Who thought that was a good idea for a guy that stretches?
Right?
Throw that out there.
I mean, you have that issue. One of my favorite bits with it is what was it? Tom Brevoort's analyzed like the photo stat with the finalized cover, because what would happen a lot is Stan and Martin were so meticulous. They just had they had a tendency to continue making changes and tweaks all the way until it had to go to the printer. And one of the little tweaks in the background of this issue is in the shops. They add text to indicate that one of them's a beauty salon, number 137, and the building next to it, they add the 135. So, and that's between the paste up and the final comic cover we get there. And I couldn't even begin to imagine how many more, units they were able to move by writing the building numbers in the background.
We may not see a second issue without that.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have it would have destroyed the illusion for every child. Would have been like, why would I waste my dime on a book that the artist couldn't even be bothered to number the buildings in the background?
Right? This isn't real. This is it's not very realistic.
How does anybody find their way around Central City?
No one's going to know if they're going up the street or down the street.
I know, right?
So I kind of bringing up the just like how this issue is positioned to carry on and continue. Some of the relationships were interesting. I did not know that about Ben Grimm being the villain later on, but now that you say that, clearly like it was set up for that, something like that to happen. I don't know, what other things do you think? The Mole Man, obviously, we hope he's taken care of. There's a little bit of a cliffhanger there. There were a number of things. Can you think of other things that sort of set this up to be a successful series because of this first issue?
It's like we were talking about before. It's the four characters were flawed, had disagreements, looked different, acted different. The villain wasn't someone that could just take off his costume and blend right in like anybody in Flash's Rogues Gallery. It was. I imagine this had to really. Now, I don't know how well it stood out when it came out in relation to the other books that were being published, even by, I guess, would have still been Atlas at the time. I don't think they changed to Marvel until like 62 or 3. But
yeah, it wasn't Marvel yet.
But it looked, that's something that would catch your eye when you see that. And then
Mhm.
I said at the end, I said a little bit of a cliffhanger. The Mole Man wasn't delivered to Central City Jail to be in the cell next to the Mirror Master. So there were a lot of things that made this something that I would think that you would read that and want to go further
Mhm.
because you want to
Yeah.
see who you come up with next. Because, sorry, this is where I'm embarrassed. Right, the Mole Man. I'll explain that later. Isn't your typical looking supervillain, but he's like, he fits more in like the stuff they've been doing for years. But you kind of want to see, well, who are they going to fight next?
Yeah.
And the characters they come up with in the very next issue, they, like I said, talk about somebody that could have shown up in one of those 50s sci-fi stories.
Yeah.
Because that's that for those that don't know, that's where they introduced the Skrulls.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But
What do you think, Joe?
I mean, I'll also add, I think one thing that helped make this book popular that it really benefited from was Reed firing that signal and everyone was going about their lives. So you had, it wasn't just a group of superheroes just sitting in a room and a red light goes off and they're all like, we've got to go save the day. It was, so Sue is like a socialite. She's like, hanging out with these other women, and there's like she has a life going on that's separate. Johnny is like the young cool kid, and he's working on a hot rod, and he's
Yeah.
like that kind of thing. So it's like, and then you have Ben, who is like in disguise, like walking around. Like there's a lore and backstory. Like they both, I don't know if this was intentional, but Stan and Jack ended up both thoroughly explaining the backstory so you completely get where these characters get their powers, but also a sliver of their day-to-day life. So you would want to know more about what's going on. Like, oh, is this like Johnny's like, oh, I can know more about Johnny, or how are they going to incorporate Sue's life? Like, are there going to be more instances where she's a typical hero, but she's at like some socialite picnic and gets called and has to come up with excuses and then what is Ben's deal? We haven't seen where any of them live yet. They haven't, the Baxter building, that none of that's established yet. So it's like, what are their lives? What is this thing that they're doing? So I think that also really benefited this book in a way that was probably more so than they could have even potentially realized.
Right. Yeah, the recipe worked very well. Yeah, and I often wonder. I mean, so much of it couldn't have been totally intentional because this was the big hit, right? I mean,
Yep.
They'd been working the comics for years before this, so but yeah, I don't know, pretty cool that it worked out the way that it did. But it's interesting to look back.
Absolutely.
And just how many of these things worked as a recipe that they could translate to other superhero stories, other characters, and expanding a universe, which is it's kind of mind-boggling to think about two guys making this one book and what it would become. It's wild. Nick, technically, didn't Captain America as a character exist first?
1941.
Yeah. Okay.
But if what's really impressive when you think about it is if you read this, then read a book, a Marvel comic published, say 10 years later in 1971, to see how far all the characters had come, how well they integrated with each other, how by this time Reed was kind of like the the go-to guy when you needed something that required, intelligence above and beyond what anybody else could have. If you needed something technological, you went to Tony. So I mean, this universe was so well thought out over time.
Yeah.
And it started with this. And I don't think, if Standard Jack said that they could have seen what they would end up developing over throughout the 60s, I think both of their noses would grow.
Mhm.
But they did. And what they came up with was incredible. And yeah, I said it had never been seen before. It won't be seen again. Comics have changed just too much, and it's already happened.
Yeah.
And we've already, as I said, we've already. I mean, Stan and Jack were the Lennon and McCartney of comics,
Mhm.
and so I said you say they're the Beatles of comics. This period of Marvel, I'll buy that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Really cool. The other like just big picture thing is, when I'm reading, especially older comics, I try to think, for the time period, how old was I? What was going on in my life? I wasn't existing when this came out, but
I wasn't. It's so old.
right. But the crazy thing is, I want to read issue 2. Like as a 36-year-old man now here in the year 2023, I'm like, I want to read the next issue now. And so that's kind of amazing staying power to me for it to still be interesting. So I think the only way that's going to happen is I got to get a omnibus, or I guess like digital comics is a good route too. But
Digital, the Epic collections, like any of that is good stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff like you may want physical copies of. There's a lot of comics out there that you probably don't need physical copies of.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
like,
I've got a lot of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, this was one like, man, getting a hardcover book again. Here's the dust jacket, but this was only $15 on Amazon, and
yeah,
you saw. I mean, it's a thick book, hardcover, but because it's Fantastic Four #1 and just the legacy, it just the nature of the book itself. To me, I was like, of course, yeah, I'll get this version. That like, especially for $15, like you can't beat that.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, those are ones. I got to get some Spider-Man stuff as well. But yeah, it was fun. So I'm really glad that you both, I don't remember who it was, recommended this for retrospective. I'm glad because it was fun to read. I even sat down and read it with my kids. They were really interested and kind of
Nice.
watching over my shoulder. And again, that speaks to the cover. I turned it over like, here, look at this. And they were instantly interested in it, which is saying something because they're not always. So again, I don't know how to dissect that formula, but something about it was super appealing to me, but all my kids as well. And they're coming at it totally fresh. They don't know who the Fantastic Four are. So yeah, good stuff.
Probably for the considering some of the movies that
I
Fantastic Four were in lately.
There's a reason why they don't, because we don't watch that stuff in my house. But I got to do a little commercial break here for Downcast Volume 4, Hunting Ground. It's live. It's live on my own website, sweetcomicshop.com right now. Technically, the campaign is over. You can still back it. It's in demand, so to speak. But I will be launching this on Kickstarter. I'm figuring out a plan. I got to get through some work stuff that's been keeping me really busy. But I'm going to be launching this on Kickstarter at some point. I think I'm going to start with Volume 1 or the reprint. And also, I'm going to take this to Indiegogo because I know there are people who are still looking at Indiegogo, and that's the only way that they're even hearing about what I'm up to. So I'll be launching it both places. I'm figuring out the timing. I'm sorry. Thanks for your patience, everybody. I needed some time to get just some personal stuff done. All good stuff, but just have been busy. So yeah, if you haven't backed it, check it out. Back it. Eric Breen, you have something to promote. I know it.
This time I'm going to promote the Geeky Puppet Show.
The Geeky Puppet Show. Is
Yes,
that on YouTube?
Yeah, it's that's the name of the channel. What my participation with that is, we will take classic comics and read them. We'll assign parts.
Oh.
And we'll read the stories. But what we do differently is, like, we do the Fantastic Four, and I do Sue's voice and Alicia. Maranya does the Thing. Venkman plays Reed as a drunk cowboy, and whoever's doing the Human Torch plays him useless and like a cowabunga surfer dude. Now, the before we recently did an issue with the Mole Man, and then we did Avengers number 12, which has the Mole Man. And the kid that runs the channel, Professor Pixel is his YouTube name. He played the Mole Man on Friday. I did it on Sunday. And every time both those are always like, and I, the Mole Man. And let me tell you, after an issue, your throat will hurt, but that's neither here nor there. All in the name of, it's, you suffer for your art.
This is entertainment, folks. Yeah.
Yes. And I think I broke Joe. But they are a riot. I mean, I just watching those, it's worth it just to hear how Pixel cracks up. But and he's got real talent. But the rest of us are just kind of hacking our way through it, but it's a lot of fun. We do the readings on Fridays and Sunday nights. Usually we'll do Fantastic Four or Spider-Man, because Pixel does J. Jonah Jameson, and that's worth the price of admission right there. Trust me on that. But that's what I'm promoting tonight.
Nice. Joe, you have a lot going on, I know it. But yeah,
I do.
What's the big thing right now we should be aware of?
Okay, there are two things. One, I actually already have my copies of the Never-Ending Party trade paperback is available in August. I got my comp copies, but it's through Dark Horse. It was a Comixology Originals book that I co-wrote with the late Rachel Pollack. But it's available for pre-order now. You could order it through your LCS. You could pre-order it on Amazon. In addition to that, I also have Dahlia in the Dark. That trade paperback's actually going to be coming out even sooner. So people should keep a lookout for that as well. That's through Mad Cave Studio. Artist on that book, Andrea Milana, is doing the art for the G.I. Joe Cobra Commander Skybound miniseries as well. So hope people check that out if you enjoy the art in Dahlia.
Cool. Very good. Well, thanks for coming on the stream for me. I know tomorrow's the 4th of July. Do you guys have big plans?
No.
Dodging explosives, maybe.
Yeah, I did. So real quick though, I said if you're gonna look up one for the Geeky Puppet Show, find the Teen Titans, because the man below me does a awesome Mad Mod.
All right.
We even got it. We even roped him into one.
Yes, it's true.
Nice.
Yeah.
And Clint, if you ever want to, exercise those vocal cords, we're always looking. Oh yeah, there's always room at the end.
All right, I will consider that for sure. As long as I can not show my face on, I feel like it'd be more difficult to be seen. You know what I mean? Maybe.
Yeah, that's optional. I usually hide behind my avatar because I'm usually making silly gestures that I don't want to have seen. So
yeah, good stuff. Cool. Well, thanks. I think we're gonna wrap up the show. I've got a few things to do tonight. With the 4th of July coming up tomorrow, but I hope everyone has a good holiday. Enjoys their time doing, I don't know, maybe even reading some comics. That sounds like fun. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time. You'll find out. You'll be surprised as I will. I'll be when I stream next. So bye everybody.
Good night, kids.